Welcome back, focused learners, to The Explainer. Now, when we think of ancient Buddhist monastic life, we usually picture, serene meditation, strict spiritual detachment, and just this rigid asceticism. But if we actually dig into the ancient legal texts, specifically the Vinaya codes, a completely different, incredibly gritty picture emerges. Today, we're going to uncover how the Buddha balanced strict spiritual discipline with gritty, real-world survival. It turns out he acted almost like a master administrator, dynamically adjusting the rules just to keep his community alive.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to move from everyday monastic medical rules to some pretty extreme medicine and meat taboos, then dive into the infamous horse barley famine crisis, look at dietary flexibility during that famine, and finally, wrap up with the really strict four-medicine classification system.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Everyday Monastic Medical Rules.
So, ancient texts record that during the autumn months, monks were actually falling ill, becoming incredibly weak and thin. Recognizing this, the Buddha prescribed four what they called melting medicines to help them regain their strength. These were ghee, oil, honey, and, surprisingly enough, rock candy. But there was a catch at first. Initially, monks were only allowed to consume these in the strict morning hours. Well, when the Buddha saw they were still weak because they couldn't take the medicine later in the day, he just pragmatically adjusted the rule. He allowed sick monks to consume them at literally any time to ensure they'd actually recover.
And this brilliantly illustrates the iterative rule-making process we see all throughout these texts. For example, the storage of simple eye medicine evolved through an almost comical series of trial and error. First, a monk hung his medicine in a bag, and of course it spilled and completely ruined the monastery walls. So the Buddha said, okay, use a box. But without a cover, dirt fell into the box, making the eye infections even worse. So the Buddha said, add a lid. Finally, monks were actually hurting their eyes trying to apply the medicine with bird feathers, so the Buddha stepped in again and mandated the use of a specialized smooth applicator. It's just pure pragmatic problem solving.
We see this exact same trial and error evolution over rigid dogma when they were treating skin conditions like scabies. It wasn't some instant divine decree. First, they tried grinding the herbs on flat stones, but the medicine kept falling in the dirt, right? So a mortar and pestle were introduced. But the monks really didn't know how to use wooden pestles, so their hands kept slipping and they kept injuring themselves. The solution? The Buddha ordered the wooden pestles to be carved narrower in the middle for a better grip and for the powder to be sifted and mixed with oil for a much smoother application.
But what happens when everyday rules collide with extreme emergencies? That brings us to Section 2, Extreme Medicine and Meat Taboos.
The texts describe a truly shocking event involving a wealthy and devout laywoman named Mahasena. During a severe meat shortage, a sick monk desperately needed meat for his medicine. Unable to buy any anywhere, Mahasena secretly cut flesh from her own thigh, cooked it, and fed it to the sick monk, who honestly ate it without knowing what it was. Well, when the Buddha found out, he was absolutely appalled. He healed her, but he immediately laid down a strict law outlawing the consumption of human flesh, fat, and blood, explicitly stating that receivers of charity must know the limits of what they accept.
Now, this incident actually sparked a wider codification of forbidden meats. But the crucial point to take away here is that these bans weren't just arbitrary spiritual dogmas. They were highly pragmatic social laws designed for public relations and survival. Eating human flesh obviously crossed a massive moral boundary. Eating elephant or horse meat was banned because those animals were royal property. You do not want to enrage the king. Eating dog meat carried severe social stigma, associating monks with outcasts. And eating snake meat offended local spiritual beliefs about the Naga or dragon class. Survival literally meant staying on the good side of society.
So how do you balance this absolute need for survival with the core Buddhist principle of compassion? Well, the Buddha established the 3 pure meats rule. Monks could eat meat, provided they hadn't seen the animal killed, hadn't heard it was killed for them, and had absolutely no suspicion it was slaughtered specifically to feed them. It is an incredibly clever rule. It neutrally ensured monks didn't drive the economic demand for animal slaughter, while still allowing them to humbly accept the vital alms they needed to just stay alive.
Now, let's move on to Section 3 and look at a crisis that truly tested the limits of monastic survival, the horse barley famine.
The timeline of this event is honestly almost unbelievable. A king named Agnidatta invited the Buddha and 500 monks for a 3-month rainy season retreat. But shortly after they arrived, the king got completely distracted by his own pleasures and somehow just forgot his promise to feed them, just ghosted them. To make matters worse, a severe famine struck the entire region, making begging for food totally impossible. So, to keep his 500 monks from starving to death, the Buddha pragmatically allowed them to accept and eat raw horse barley provided by passing horse traders.
And this simple number, one du, really highlights the stark, gritty reality of the situation. The traders only had so much feed to go around, so the daily ration was meticulously and equally split. One du of barley for the horse and one du for the monk. I mean, can you imagine the highest spiritual seekers of the age surviving entirely on raw horse feed for 3 straight months? It shows an incredible level of adaptability and absolutely zero ego when faced with actual starvation.
This extreme crisis forced a radical shift in the rules, leading us to Section 4, Dietary Flexibility in Famine.
This brilliantly illustrates the Buddha's flexible compassion. Think about it. In times of plenty, the rules were incredibly strict to promote detachment. Monks couldn't eat leftovers, couldn't keep food overnight, couldn't store food inside, and couldn't even cook indoors. But during a famine, all of those rules were immediately suspended. You could keep leftovers, eat early, store food indoors, and forage. Starvation was clearly a far bigger threat to spiritual practice than hoarding a little leftover food.
The dietary rules expanded drastically just to keep the community alive. Monks were suddenly permitted to forage for pond vegetation, like wild lotus roots and water caltrops. They were allowed to consume 8 different types of nutritional gruel. The text even explicitly state they were permitted to accept food offered by non-human entities. We're talking forest spirits or nagas, just to get enough calories to survive the crisis. Whatever it took.
But here is the critical part. The very moment the famine ended and food became plentiful again, the Buddha instantly closed all those survival loopholes. The strict fasting, the bans on leftovers, the bans on storing food, they were all reinstated without hesitation. If a monk broke them now, they faced a formal penalty known as a pachitya, and this proves, without a doubt, that the relaxed laws were entirely about maintaining a delicate balance for survival, not at all about seeking permanent comfort.
So how did they keep track of all this? That brings us to our final section, the strict 4 medicine classification.
To manage all of these different consumption rules, the ancient code utilized a brilliant overarching categorization system. Literally everything a monk consumed was classified into 4 distinct types of medicine, based entirely on its legal shelf life. Standard meals were time medicine, expiring at noon. Filtered juices were time period medicine and could be kept past noon. Those rich melting medicines we discussed earlier, they had a 7-day shelf life. And basic spices and salts like ginger and pepper were lifelong medicines that could be kept indefinitely.
The logical rigor of this system is truly incredible, especially when we look at the shortest lifespan rule. The ancient law dictated that if you mix a lifetime medicine, like ginger, with a daily medicine, like standard rice, the entire batch legally inherits the shortest expiration time. So that mixture immediately expires at noon. It's a completely airtight legal framework that prevents loopholes, acting a whole lot like our modern food safety and expiration dating systems. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, profound question to ponder. The Vinaya codes show us that the Buddha was a deeply compassionate pragmatist who understood that without a physical body, there is no spiritual liberation. So, translating that to today, in our own modern lives, how much should we bend our rigid rules of discipline to survive the messy, unpredictable realities of the world? It's something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep learning.